Let's do a little bit of meditation to try and ensure our mind is in as positive a state as possible for the last morning of our weekend retreat. So according to Buddhism, having the human life is very precious compared with other types of beings such as animals who have more suffering, more difficulties, more challenges than we do in general. And also a mind or brain that is not able to fully understand things, to be able to improve one's life and work on one's mind, transform one's mind, and become free of suffering. So as human beings, we have special conditions. And not just as human beings, but what is called the precious human life. The precious human life is a particular type of human life, where we have a human body which is healthy, relatively healthy, and our senses are functioning. We're able to see and hear and speak, and our brain is able to understand things and analyze them and change itself. So not every human being has all of these conditions. So if we do have them, we're very fortunate. We're also fortunate to have freedom to decide for ourselves what we want to do with our life, what we want to think, believe, how we want to behave, and so on. Not all human beings have such freedom. Some people's lives are controlled by others, by the government or by their family, by their religious leaders. So again, if we have such freedoms, we're very fortunate. And also, from the point of view of Buddhism, it's very fortunate to have the chance to learn about the Dharma, the teachings that show us the potential that we have, the potential to transform our minds, free our minds from suffering and the causes of suffering, and develop real happiness, not just transitory, momentary pleasure, but real deep and long-lasting happiness and peace of mind, all the way up to the highest happiness that's possible, the happiness of enlightenment or awakening. So every living being has this potential lying within their minds, but not all beings are in a situation where they can learn about this potential that they have and learn how to make it manifest, how to bring it out and develop it and bring it to its fulfillment, its culmination. So the Dharma are the teachings that show us how to do that. So having the chance to learn the Dharma and practice the Dharma is also very, very fortunate. So if we have all of these conditions in our life, both outer and inner, it means that we can do really good things with our life. We can make our lives beneficial for ourselves, freeing ourselves from suffering and finding greater peace and happiness. And we can also make our lives beneficial and meaningful for others. We can help other people and other beings like animals and so on. We can help them to have less suffering and more peace and happiness. So try to feel how fortunate you are to have such a life with all these conditions. And then see if you can feel the wish to use your life in ways that are beneficial and meaningful to help yourself, to help others, to help the world as much as you can, and even if you're not able to help very much, to at least avoid harming, causing more suffering and problems to others and to the world. So that's kind of like the bottom line, how we can use this precious human life that we have in the most meaningful way. And then we can connect that wish with what we're doing here this morning. Listening to, thinking about, learning about, and trying to put into practice these teachings of the Buddha, the Dharma. See if you can feel the wish that this will be beneficial as much as possible for ourselves, for others, for the world. And if you're comfortable with the idea of attaining enlightenment, becoming a Buddha to help all living beings, then you can think of that as the long-term, ultimate goal, and wish that what we're doing here will bring us closer to that goal of enlightenment. Yesterday, we were talking about compassion, and I mentioned that, of course, we can do as much as we can in a sort of physical way to help people around us, our family, friends, and so on, who may be suffering. But we also have to accept that we have limitations. We can't help all the suffering beings throughout the world, but having compassion in our heart, wishing them to be free of suffering, that itself is something beneficial. It is an act of compassion, an act of kindness for others. And this morning I remembered something that Lama Zopa Rinpoche once said, and I found really helpful. He said that, for example, the first precept in Buddhism, refraining from killing. So when we become Buddhists, we're usually encouraged to take at least that precept if we can't take all the others. And that's kind of, again, like a bottom line. If you want to be a Buddhist, you have to be willing to give up harming other beings, other sentient beings. So I said, even just that one practice of refraining from killing other beings, that itself is a kind of act of kindness for others. It's like social work, social work for other sentient beings, because it means that all sentient beings are safe from you. They have nothing to fear from you. They are not in danger from you. Your very existence in this world is such that you are not posing a threat to any other sentient being. So that means, they can be at ease with you. They can be relaxed with you. They don't have to be afraid of you. I mean, they might be afraid of you, but, there's no need for them to be afraid of you. You're not posing any threat to them. Something like that. So I found that really beautiful. Yeah, very inspiring as well. Just to keep that one precept, or at least try our best to live our lives in such a way that we're aware of other sentient beings and how they don't want to suffer, they don't want to die, they don't want to be killed, they don't want to be harmed, and just live in consideration of that and really try not to do anything harmful to others. That itself is a great act of kindness and compassion and a gift to others, because every being cherishes their life. That's the thing we cherish most of all, is our life. And so if we are protecting the lives of others, we are doing them a great act of kindness, a great gift. So anyway, I wanted to share that with you. Quite beautiful. And then continuing with this practice of compassion. So yesterday we were looking at how when we face problems, difficulties, suffering, one way we can utilize those experiences and transform them into something useful and positive is with compassion, by contemplating that other people, other living beings also suffer. We're not the only one who has suffering and problems. Others have suffering and problems too. And because right now, at this moment, we're experiencing some suffering, we're in a good position to be able to understand and have empathy with the suffering of others. We can really know what they're going through, right? And so that gives us the chance to really have compassion, genuine compassion, not just something up here in our head, oh yeah, others suffer, but oh well, I'm enjoying myself. So, really heartfelt compassion, empathy for others. And by the way, it also gives some relief to our own suffering, because then we don't feel so alone and isolated in our suffering. We feel connected with others who are suffering too. And also just turning our attention away. I can't remember whether I mentioned this or not, but when we are experiencing a problem, something painful, something unpleasant, there's this tendency to really get kind of obsessed with it. Oh me, oh isn't this terrible, oh isn't this horrible, and it can seem really, really huge. And I think I did talk about this. It's like making a mountain out of a molehill, because sometimes the problem isn't really that huge. It could be quite minor, quite small, but just by obsessing about it, it sort of blows up and seems like something really, really huge. So then by turning our attention away from me and my problem and thinking about others and their problems, we can recognize the problems that some people have are much worse, much bigger than ours. So then in comparison, our problem can appear to shrink and seem smaller. And then when it seems smaller, we also feel it, this is how I feel anyway. It seems like, okay, it's not that bad and I can manage it. It seems manageable instead of unmanageable and overwhelming. So that's also really helpful. So thinking of the suffering of others has multiple benefits. For our, relieving our own suffering, but also increasing our compassion, which is such an essential quality, absolutely essential to be able to progress along the path. So we really need as much compassion as we can. So the suffering we experience gives us a chance to have more compassion. So then there's also another practice, which probably most of you have heard of, that can be used when we experience a problem, and that is the practice of Tonglen, or that's the Tibetan term, and it's usually translated as taking and giving. And I think Pema Chodron has made this practice quite famous. She teaches it a lot. So, if you attend any of her teachings or retreats or read any of her books, you've probably encountered this practice, Tonglen. And the way it's traditionally taught, at least in our tradition, we are asked to contemplate the suffering of others, all living beings, all sentient beings throughout the universe, who are numberless, and their sufferings are multiple and varied and so forth. So we think of all the sentient beings and all their suffering, and then we meditate on compassion. generating the wish for them to be free of their suffering. And then we go one step further and feel, I would like to take their suffering away from them and take it onto myself so that they can be free of suffering. They don't have to suffer. So I will take it from them and take it onto myself. And then there's variations of the practice, but one way is you think of your self-centered attitude, kind of this selfish attitude that we tend to have, where we feel, I am the most important person in the universe, I am number one, everything to do with me is more important than anyone else. So that sort of self-centered attitude that we have based on our ego, our false sense of self or I. So we imagine that attitude in our heart chakra in some sort of form. There's variations of that. One is just like a black spot or a black rock or something. And for myself, when I heard about black holes, black holes in space, I thought, well, that's a good image, because they say that whatever, I don't know if this is true or not, I think there's a debate about it. They say whatever goes into a black hole just disappears, it goes out of existence. So I thought, well, that's a good thing to use. I think of a black hole there at my heart, and that represents my ego, my selfishness, all my negative attitudes and bad karma and everything. So imagine taking the suffering of others. We can imagine it in the form of smoke or fog or something. It sort of comes out of them, and then it comes into ourselves and goes to this thing in our heart, and there it just goes out of existence. It gets destroyed, becomes non-existent, and our ego and our self-centeredness also disappear and go out of existence. So I imagine everything going into this black hole and disappearing, and then the black hole itself disappears. It all gets annihilated, vanished. So that's the taking part of the practice. And then the giving part of the practice is to meditate on love, which is wishing others to have happiness. Because everybody wants happiness, everyone needs happiness, everyone deserves happiness. So we meditate on that, and we really generate this wish that others will have whatever they want, whatever they need to be happy. And then we think of all of our own good stuff, our good karma, our good qualities, our positive energy, our resources, whatever good things we have in our life. We also imagine something in our heart. Sometimes they say a wish-fulfilling jewel. So you can just use your imagination to figure out what that looks like. So I just imagine this really beautiful, sparkling, kind of jewel at my heart that represents all the good things. And then you imagine rays of light going from that out to others and reaching all living beings and becoming whatever they need to be happy. You satisfy all their needs, all their wishes, and they all become happy. So that's the traditional way of doing the practice, and again, like there's variation. So you may have encountered somewhat different ways of doing it, but that's normal. And they say that for some people initially it can be rather uncomfortable or even frightening to think about taking the suffering of others, which is quite understandable. Taking all sentient beings suffering, or even taking one person's suffering, can be quite frightening. And so if you feel that way, you can start by taking on your own suffering. Practice taking on your own suffering. For example, you can think of the suffering you're going to experience today and tomorrow and this year and so on into the future. So that to me makes a lot of sense, because if we don't even know how to handle our own problems, we get overwhelmed by our own problems and freak out about our own problems, then is it realistic to think that we can take on the problems of others? And somewhere along the line, I can't remember where because it was a long time ago, I came across this little practice, Tonglen practice, where you use a problem that you yourself are experiencing at the present moment and take on this problem for the benefit of others, wishing that others will be free of their suffering. And I had some doubt, I wonder where I got this practice from, and is it really a valid practice? And then recently I was reading this book called The Art of Happiness by Howard Cutler in conversation with His Holiness, and they were talking about this practice, Tonglen practice, at one point. And His Holiness said, you can start by taking on your own suffering. And he said, for example, just when you have a problem, to think, may I, by experiencing this pain and suffering, be able to help other people and save others who may have to go through the same experience. So when I read that, I thought, okay, so that practice that I learned a long time ago is okay, it's valid. So I thought to just explain this practice, and then we could do it together, because it's a very helpful method to use, and it's something, once you learn it, you can just do it in a minute or two, anytime. So even in the middle of your day, you don't have to sit down and do any kind of formal meditation practice. But if you're experiencing a problem in your daily life, or you're in traffic, in a traffic jam or something, you can do this practice, and it can, it's in a couple of minutes. It doesn't mean the problem will go away, but your mental attitude about it changes, so that it doesn't feel so horrible and overwhelming and unbearable and so on, and it gives you some mental relief, puts you in a better state of mind in relation to this problem. So like I say, when a problem is happening, then you can in whatever situation, whether you're doing a formal meditation, or you're just, in a traffic jam, or in a queue at the bank or the supermarket or whatever, you can just contemplate, I'm not the only person in the world who has a problem like this. Lots of other people and other beings have similar problems. And you can spend as much time as you like thinking about that, thinking about people in Venezuela who have to stand in line all day just to get a loaf of bread or some, petrol, gas for their car, and or whatever, whatever comes to your mind. Other people, other beings who have similar experiences, and then you can connect with them and think, wow, now I understand how difficult that is, how much suffering they have, And then the next step would be to generate compassion, which is wishing them to be free of their suffering, wishing yourself and all other beings to be freed from suffering and problems. How wonderful that would be. Wouldn't that be great? And then the next step would be to accept this problem that you are having. And so it's like, because our normal response to problems is to have aversion, resistance, dislike, go away, I don't want you, I don't like you, kind of fighting with it. And actually, I don't know if you notice this, but I do. That kind of attitude doesn't work, and it actually makes things worse, because then it's like, not only do you have this problem, but there's also this resistance. It's almost like a battle going on inside of you. There's this problem, but I don't want it, and go away, leave me alone. But it doesn't go away. It doesn't make the problem go away. And it just kind of puts your mind into a really bad state. So it's understandable that we feel that way, but it's also not helpful. So if we can realize that it's not helpful, then this method is to totally change that attitude. Instead of saying, go away, I don't want you, we say, I accept you. I accept this problem. And initially that may be hard, we might have some resistance to the idea of accepting it. It's not what we normally do. But if you try it out, you'll probably find, hey, this actually feels better. Stops the fighting, the battle, and gives some inner peace. So you say to yourself, I accept this suffering, I accept this problem that I'm experiencing right now. And by doing that, by my accepting and being willing to bear this problem, may all those other people, all those other beings who have a similar kind of problem, may they be free. May their problems be relieved. So it's kind of like willingness to take on this suffering, this problem, like bear this burden on behalf of others. And you might notice that it actually brings about a nice change in your mind, a transformation in your mind. So let's just try it and see how it feels. So try to sit up straight if you can, because that can help your mind to be more awake and alert. But at the same time, be relaxed. If you notice any tension in your body, let it melt and flow away, flow out of you, sink into the earth, disappear. And now bring to mind some problem that is currently present in your life, or even at this moment. It could be something minor, relatively minor, like some discomfort or pain in your body, or something you're worried about, unhappy about, upset about. So just choose one of your problems. Bring that to mind. And check to see what is your normal response to this problem. Check to see if there's resistance, dislike, aversion, fear, wanting to push it away or wanting to get away from it, separate from it. And if you do have any of those attitudes, any of those responses, what effect do they have? Are they helpful? Are they helpful in dealing with the problem, or not helpful? Do they even make things worse? So we do have a choice. We don't have to go along with those kinds of responses, even if they arise in our minds. So another choice that we have is to use this experience to increase our compassion. So let's try this method of Tonglen, using our own problem. So think about how other people and other beings who have the same kind of problem that you have, or something similar, even if it's not exactly the same, it may be similar. So you might actually know other people you know, people you've heard of who have the same kind of problem, or you can just use your imagination and think about others who have it. So try to let that awareness sink in, that you are not the only person, only being in the world who has this kind of problem. Many others do as well. And it could be that there are some who have it even worse than you do. And because you yourself are experiencing how unpleasant it is to have this kind of problem, then you're in a good position to understand how they feel, what it's like for them. And to have empathy and compassion for them. So you might find that you can easily feel compassion for those other people. But even if that feeling of compassion doesn't come up in your mind, you can still say to yourself some words that express the feeling of compassion. And that's a way of encouraging our mind to feel it. So gradually that feeling will start to come up more easily and naturally. So you can say to yourself something like, I wish all those other people, all the other beings, to be free from this suffering, or how wonderful it would be if all of those people and beings could be free of this suffering, just as I would like to be free of it. So you can use whatever words you like. And just try to find some words that can help you to generate at least the thought of compassion, if not the actual feeling of compassion. And then see if you can go one step further and choose to accept your own problem, your own suffering, with the wish that by doing so, all those other people and beings will be free of theirs. So again, you can do that just by saying some words to yourself, such as, by my accepting and going through this problem, this difficulty, may all the other people and beings who have the same kind of problem be free of theirs. May they be free of their suffering and the causes of their suffering. So you can use those words or whatever words you like. Just say those words to yourself. And then just check how it feels to have done this practice compared with the initial experience you had of possibly feeling aversion, fear, resistance to the problem, wanting to push it away, not wanting it to be there. So has there been any change in your mind, in your attitude towards the problem? Did anybody find that helpful? So if you want to do it on your own, you can spend as much time or as little time as you want. Like I say, even just in a minute or two, going through those steps can be really, really helpful in just looking at your problem, your suffering in a different way. And so that's like a really simple way of doing the Tonglen practice. And there are, of course, more complex ways of doing Tonglen, which probably many of you have learned and maybe even practice regularly. And I don't know, Tonglen practice gives us a different perspective on suffering and problems than what we normally have. And like I say, it can be really helpful for our own mind to not be so overwhelmed by our problems. And also courage, can give a sense of courage. The Dalai Lama talks about that, that compassion gives courage. Thinking about others and the problems and sufferings faced by others. If you do it in the right way, it can really give you a lot of courage, a lot of energy, to keep going and doing what you can to relieve suffering, help others, and so on. And also a sense of meaning to suffering. In the book by Sogye Rinpoche called The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, some of you may have read, he has a whole section, I think a whole chapter on Tonglen and different ways of practicing Tonglen. And I think in that book somewhere he mentions the story of this artist in New York who was suffering from AIDS and, I guess suffering a lot. And he wasn't a Buddhist, he wasn't interested in meditation or any sort of spiritual practice. But a friend of his told him about this kind of simple Tonglen practice, like the one we just did of taking on your suffering for the benefit of others. And he tried it out, and he found it really helpful because before that, he just felt like the suffering he was going through was meaningless, useless. Like there's just no use, no meaning to this suffering. Why am I having this suffering? So then that adds more suffering to it. You got the suffering plus this sense of, why? It's useless. So the Tonglen practice at least gave him a sense of meaning, that he could use his suffering for something beneficial, something meaningful. So he found that helpful. So it seems like, Tonglen, this idea of Tonglen, this practice of Tonglen can be useful even for people who are not Buddhist and not interested in following the whole Buddhist path. Any questions before I go on?
I've had an issue with severe reflux and heartburn for over 30 years. And lately, I've been, doing the Tonglen practice when my heartburn flares up. Kind of a funny story. At one of the recent retreats here, a friend came up to me and said that he was having severe heartburn. And kind of knowing that I was a doctor, do I have anything? I said, well, let me do Tonglen practice because I have, severe issues with heartburn. And also, here, have a pill. And I checked back with him an hour later, and I said, how you doing? He said, I'm feeling a lot better. So the question is, was it the Tonglen or was it the pill? I don't know. I'd have to do a double-blind controlled study. But I've been using that, whenever my issues flare up, and at least it makes me feel better. I don't know if I'm helping others. Yeah.
I mean,
it's
actually,
kind of a funny story.
Yeah, they do say that the practice of Tonglen is really done for our own benefit because it's actually not possible for one person to take away the suffering of another. Even the Buddha cannot do that. Even because they say, if the Buddha could take away all our suffering, he would have done that a long time ago, and we wouldn't be suffering anymore. So they say it's actually not possible to take on or take away somebody else's suffering. Except, they say there are some rare exceptions because of some very strong karmic connection between two people. It might happen that, and there are some stories apparently of somebody doing Tonglen and then that person getting sick and the other person getting cured. So it can happen. They say normally it doesn't.
I took away his suffering, but it was probably the pill that I gave him.
Yeah, well, you could try another time and not give them a pill. But it's hard to know, what causes and conditions there are for someone to get sick or to be relieved of their sickness and so on. So, but they say the main reason for doing the Tonglen practice is to increase our own compassion, to help us to be less self-centered and more compassionate, and also create a lot of merit. It's a very virtuous, way to create good karma, as Sherry was talking about yesterday. So they say, just in a few minutes you do this practice, you create a huge amount of good karma, merit, and also purifying negative karma. So it's like a really, really good thing to do. For our own practice and our own spiritual development. And then, of course, ultimately, as we develop on the path, our ability to help others increases as well, and eventually become a Buddha. So in that way, it does help others, but in the immediate sense, it may not. Otherwise we could take on all the suffering of the Syrian people and the Sudanese people. They wouldn't have their suffering anymore, but it's not so easy to do that.
Is it better to focus on a large group of people as opposed to specific individuals that you're very close to?
Well, the traditional teachings do talk in that way. They do describe the practice in that way of all sentient beings. So if you're able to do that comfortably, then you can. But on the other hand, it is also possible to do the practice just with one person at a time. For example, if there's somebody who's sick or suffering in some way, that person, you really care about that person, you can do the practice with that person and imagine taking on their suffering. So any way that you do it is good, depending on your ability, depending on your time, depending on,
Like whatever. You don't have to worry about attachment. Like say if it's a family member who's suffering, on an ongoing basis, and you just focus all your efforts on them, maybe broaden it to all people in their situation?
Yeah.
Or does it not matter?
Well, most of the time there is attachment to our family members and our friends, and that's why it's sometimes easier to feel compassion for them than for strangers or people on the other side of the world. So for sure, there's probably some attachment there. But I don't know, the way I think of it is attachment isn't something we can just get rid of like right away. It's still going to be there for a long time until we realize emptiness. So we shouldn't let attachment get in the way of doing work to help our loved ones. So perhaps you could just be aware of the attachment, and one way you could start to overcome the attachment would be to think of that person plus everyone else who has the similar kind of suffering. So that way, that's a sort of antidote to attachment. But in a way, it's also helpful because we do feel love and compassion for our loved ones. It's a lot easier to feel love and compassion for them than for total strangers. So in a way, we can use that attachment, which helps us to have more love and compassion, to then feel the same way towards others. Because, for example, there's this story in the teachings about Atisha, who's one of the great lamas who brought Buddhism to Tibet. And a mother, asked Atisha, what is immeasurable love? Something like that, yeah. And he said, it's, because she had a baby, so he said, it's feeling love for all, the same love you have for your baby, for all living beings, for everybody. And she said, oh, wow, that's really hard. But I think the point is, the love that we have, if we could remove the attachment part of it and just that love that we have for family members and friends and so forth, that's the kind of feeling that we do want to develop for everybody else. So in a way, it's good that we at least have it for some people so that we know what it's like. And then we just have to work on trying to expand it and extend it to more and more and more people. So I think it's fine to do the practice just for family and friends, but have the awareness that, eventually we want to be able to do the same practice and have the same feelings for more and more and more and more people and beings.
I would say Tonglen is my get-out-of-jail-free card for animosity. So I have animosity towards someone, just to do Tonglen on that person just cures me. I don't know if it cures anybody else of anything, but it cures me of animosity.
Yeah. Yeah, because if we can understand that people we dislike, the so-called enemies, that they suffer, we can understand that they have suffering too. That can soften our heart, soften our mind, and open our heart more to them. So understanding that they have suffering, and then even going further, may I take away that person's suffering. That's very, very powerful. Yeah, so it's a real multi-purpose practice. Multi-benefit. Yeah. So I wanted to go on and talk about another method. I hope you're not feeling overwhelmed with so many different methods. So this is using emptiness. For those who are not so familiar with Buddhist teachings, emptiness is the term we use to refer to the true nature of things, the way things actually exist. And I already spoke about how our basic problem, according to Buddhism, our basic problem is ignorance. We don't see reality. We don't see things as they are. And that includes our own self, I, me. We don't see ourselves as we are. We don't see others as they are. We don't see the world and all the things and all the events in the world as they are. So we see things in a mistaken way, in a distorted way. And so it's like we are confused. We're in a state of confusion. And in this state of confusion, then, we get angry, we get hostile, we get attached and greedy, and so on. We make all these mistakes and create suffering for ourselves and others. So we need to wake up and see things as they are. And so the way things are, the reality of things is referred to as emptiness. And the term emptiness can be misleading. Some people think it means nothingness. There's actually people who think, the true nature of things is that they don't exist. They're not there. And that's not true. That's not the meaning of emptiness. So emptiness doesn't mean nothingness. It doesn't mean things are not existing at all. It just means that they are empty of a false way of existing, which appears to us and which we buy into, we believe in. So I think one analogy I think is helpful is to think, like, I don't know, I think there are these glasses you can put on that distort your vision, so everything appears distorted. Yeah? Funny glasses. Okay, so if you put those kind of glasses on, then you're going to see everything in a wrong way, in a mistaken way, double or fractured or whatever. So ignorance is a bit like that with our mind. It's like glasses that completely cover our mind, so everything we see and experience appears in a distorted way, not how it really is. So when we say things are empty, or their ultimate nature is emptiness, that means that things are empty of this distorted way in which we normally see them. In other words, they don't exist like that. But that doesn't mean they don't exist at all, full stop. They do exist. They just exist in a different way than we normally see them. So that's a simple way of talking about emptiness. But then it's not so easy to understand emptiness. Normally, one needs to listen to a lot of teachings, study, discuss, think about, meditate on, and it's a long process that can take years or even lifetimes to really get it. Okay, so it's not so simple. If it was simple, we'd already have gotten it a long time ago. But it's not so simple. It's very challenging. But anyway, there are some ways we can start to get an understanding of emptiness and work with this idea of emptiness that can also help us in dealing with our problems, with our difficulties. So one way to start approaching an understanding of emptiness is to contemplate how things exist dependently. Probably most of you have heard this before, but it doesn't hurt to hear it again and think about it again. Because the way things appear to us, this kind of false or distorted way that things appear to us, is as if they are independently existing, as if they exist independently, meaning like cut off from everything else, all by themselves, autonomous, totally on their own, from their own side, independent of everything else. This is actually something subtle. It's not so easy to recognize, but this is what the great masters and yogis say, that this is how things appear to us. And it's actually not true, because nothing exists that way. Nothing is independent. Whatever exists depends on other things for its existence. And so contemplating the ways in which things exist dependently rather than independently helps to reduce the tendency to see things as if they exist independently. So this may sound very theoretical and intellectual and so on, but trying it out is actually very helpful. So I'm going to lead you through a meditation doing this, and hopefully you'll see that it is helpful. So I'm going to ask you to think of a person, because much of our problems, many of our problems, have to do with other people. Yeah, so there are certain people that we might find difficult, challenging. They push our buttons. They hurt us or irritate us, or we don't approve of the way they are and things they're doing and so on. So a lot of kind of agitation and anger and hostility and so on can come up in our mind when we see that person, or we hear that person's name, or we just think about that person, right? So this is a cause of a lot of suffering, right? Other people and their these horrible people. If they could just disappear in a black hole in space, then things would be a lot better. So that can't happen, and instead what we need to do is work on our mind, work on our attitudes towards these people, and doing a little bit of contemplation of emptiness or approach to emptiness can really help to at least cool down our mental agitation. So I'm going to ask you to think of a person that you find problematic. And it could be somebody you actually know, a family member, a neighbor, somebody at work, your boss. It could also be somebody you don't know, like a politician, a public figure. Okay, so so try to sit up straight. Be relaxed. You might want to take a few deep breaths. Let the breath come in slowly and deeply, and then let it go out slowly, either through your nose or your mouth, and let go of any tension. Let it go out with your breath. Any tension in your body or your mind, breathe it out with your breath. Then just resume your normal rate of breathing. If there are any thoughts in your mind that are not related to what we are doing, you might be already thinking about what you're going to do when you go home today or whatever. Put those thoughts aside and make the determination to keep your mind focused on what we're doing, this meditation that we are doing. So now, bring to mind a person that you have difficulty with. I'll call this person a problematic person. You might have many such people, but just choose one. And if you're doing this meditation for the first time, it might be better not to think of someone who's caused you a huge amount of suffering, because thinking of that person might bring up very difficult feelings that you may not be able to manage. So it might be better to think of someone towards whom you have just moderate feelings of dislike or aversion or hurt or whatever. And if you can, have a mental image of that person, a mental picture of that person. You can imagine them in front of you, or just think of them wherever they may be right now. And just check the way that this person appears to you. Does it seem as if this person is a source of suffering, a source of problems from their own side, in and of themselves, in a very solid, real, fixed, permanent way? In other words, does it seem as if this person is just completely bad and annoying and irritating, all on their own, all by themselves, independent of any other factors? Like that's their real nature, how they really are out there from their own side. So the Buddhist masters and yogis say that this is how things appear to us. A bad person, a person we don't like, does seem to be that way. It seems like they're really bad from their own side, autonomously, inherently, independently. So that's how they appear. Whether you're able to recognize that or not is okay. You can still carry on with the meditation and just explore how this person really exists. So one way we can do that is to contemplate how the person is made up of parts, many different parts. They're not just one whole, solid, partless thing. There's many parts to them. We can start with their body, which is the most obvious thing. That's the thing that we actually see. So a body is made up of many, many, many parts. And if we think about the parts of this person's body and ask ourselves, does that part annoy me? Is that part irritating? Is that part of the body a problem for me? Make me suffer? Then it can be quite interesting. So just to give an example, you could think about the person's ear, right ear or left ear. So just focus on that ear and ask yourself, is that ear a problem for me? Does that make me suffer? And what about the other ear? And what about the nose? What about their arm? Right arm or left arm, take your pick. And remember, the arm too is made up of parts. There's the upper part of the arm, the lower part of the arm, the hand, the fingers, the thumb, the fingernails. Just explore the different parts of the arm of that person. And can you find anything there that is a problem for you, that makes you suffer, makes you unhappy? So just continue doing that on your own. Just choosing different parts of the person's body and asking yourself if that part causes me unhappiness, causes me suffering, is a problem for me. And it can also be helpful to think that the parts of the body we can see are made up of smaller parts that we cannot see, like cells, molecules, atoms, subatomic particles. So just try to see if you can find any part of that person, any part of their body that is a source of suffering, a problem for you. And in case you do find some part of their body that you do feel that way about, that's the thing that is so annoying or irritating for me, drives me crazy. And remember that it's impermanent. Every part of our body is actually changing all the time. It's not the same from one moment to the next. What's there one moment is gone the next. Now, some of you might think, well, I don't really have a problem with their body so much, it's their mind. In their mind, they have all these stupid ideas and thoughts and attitudes and beliefs, and then they're doing all these stupid things, these bad things. So you might feel it's their mind, not their body, that is the problem. But then ask yourself, can you see their mind? Is the mind something you can actually see? Can you really know what's going on in that person's mind? Not only right now at the present moment, but also the past. Because the mind is like a stream, a river, a continuum going through time and changing moment by moment by moment, influenced by so many different factors and causes and conditions, including the karma from the past, conditioning from this life, and so on. And it's changing, it's impermanent. It's not always the same. So in looking through all the parts of this person, can you really find something you can point to and say, that's the thing that I find really annoying, really irritating, makes me suffer, makes me unhappy? And another thing that we can contemplate that can be helpful here is, does everyone see the person in the same way? So in our mind, to our mind, in our view, the person appears as annoying and irritating and problematic, a source of suffering, a source of unhappiness, and it seems as if that's how they really are from their own side, independently. But if that was true, they really existed that way, then everybody else would see them in the same way that we do. everyone else would feel the same way we do. Is that true? What about this person's parents, mother, father? Do they see them the same way we do? Or the person may have a spouse or partner, may have children, friends, pets. How did those beings see this person? Do they see them the same way we do? So in thinking this way, we will probably come up with people who actually like this person, admire this person, love this person, think they're great, they're wonderful. And that can be a real challenge to our perception, our view of the person. But then we may think, well, anybody who likes this person is stupid, is blind. They don't see them as they are. But is that true? Do we see this person as they are? Do we see this person in a more realistic way than those who are close to him or her, like their parents and family and pets and so on? Do we know them better than those people? And what about the Buddhas? It said that the mind of a Buddha sees everyone and everything in the most correct way, as they really are. And in the mind of a Buddha, there's not the slightest bit of irritation, anger, aversion, dislike. There's only love and compassion, care and concern, forgiveness, patience. Try to imagine stepping into the mind of a Buddha and looking at that person from that point of view. So after contemplating these points, just check your mind to see if there's been any change in the way you see this person. Do you still see this person in exactly the same way that you did when we started the meditation? So Lama Yeshe, one of my teachers, used this expression, concrete view, referring to the way we normally see things, ourselves and others and so on. We see things as if they're very concrete, very solid, very real, existing in a certain way out there from their own side. So like a bad person, somebody we don't like, someone we have a problem with, seems like they're really bad, really horrible in and of themselves, independently, in a very solid, concrete way. Does that make sense? I mean, there's something we have to just kind of check in our experience. It's something kind of subtle, but, it seems like, oh, that person is just so horrible and they drive me crazy and that it's going to be like that forever and ever. It's never going to change. And they're really like that out there from their own side. So that's the mistaken view that we have of things. Yeah, that's the wrong view we have of things. And yet we normally don't question that. We just buy into it, believe in it, go along with it, reinforce it again and again and again. So a meditation like this is starting to work against this tendency, this concrete view that we have of things. So it may not, just what we did now, may not lead to a realization of emptiness, but it can have the effect of softening the concrete view. Yeah, that concrete view can start to seem a little softer, a little more transparent, and not so solid. I can see some of you nodding your heads. So and then that, in turn, that softening of the concrete view can really help our mind to not be... Because if we see things in a very concrete way, that feeds our emotions. Yeah, our anger towards people we don't like, our attachment towards the people we like, and so on. So it sort of feeds those attitudes. Whereas if we can soften the concrete view, things can seem not so solid and a little bit more soft and transparent and illusory-like. Then these emotions that we have, like anger and attachment and so on, they can soften as well. They will not be so strong, so powerful. So even without a full understanding of emptiness, which is not so easy and usually takes quite a bit of time, just doing this kind of contemplation can be helpful. Does that make sense? And another way in which... So it's said that there are actually three ways in which things exist dependently as opposed to independently. So one way is, as we did in the meditation, that things are made up of parts. Things depend on parts. So a body, for example, is made up of many, 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 many parts. Zillions, if you consider all the tiny subatomic particles. So there's zillions of parts there. And without those parts, there would be no body. Body wouldn't exist if you take away all the parts. So that's kind of simple, not too difficult to understand. And it's helpful. It's helpful to kind of mentally, take things apart and look at all the parts and, try to find that object. And we won't. All we find are just a bunch of parts. So that's one way that kind of softens the concrete view. Another way, which I didn't mention here, but it's even easier, and that is causes and conditions. Things are dependent on causes and conditions. So a body, and this is also something very helpful, you could do it on your own. A body comes into existence inside of the womb of a mother. It starts off as this tiny little zygote, microscopic. We can't even see it with our eyes. And even if we did, if we looked at it through a microscope, we wouldn't see any of the features that we see now of that person, just be this little blob. So that can be very helpful, to think that person who's so horrible and irritating and so on once looked like this little tiny blob. And then that thing grew and it started, became a bigger blob. And then it started to have shapes, little arms and legs and so on, and nose. And but just to think of that process of how that body came into existence over time in the mother's womb, and then out of the womb once it was born. And that's helpful too, to think about a little baby. That person was once this little newborn baby. Because I think usually when we see babies, we feel kind of soft, it's sort of, oh, how cute. We just want to take care of it and feed it and protect it, it's kind of very adorable and lovable. So thinking of that irritating person as this little baby, that too can change something. That they once looked like that, and then they were a little kid running around playing and growing and so on and so forth. So just thinking about the causes and conditions and how that person came into existence, and also, the way they are now, which we find probably quite annoying and irritating, is dependent on so many factors, so many causes and conditions. Karma from past lives that they brought with them into this life, and then conditioning in this life from their family and their education system and other people they meet, and so on and so forth. So they gradually, in dependence on all these different factors, developed into the person they are now. And that's continuing. It's a continuing process. They're also changing. And it's possible in time that they could be a very different person than they are now. There's stories of that, right? So people who can be really annoying and irritating at one point in time and do really awful things can transform into a completely different person. Like Nelson Mandela, for example. I haven't read his whole story, but, he was he was a really brilliant person, but he was really angry and, advocating violence before he was put into prison. And then after prison, he came out a totally different person. Very, very amazing being, yeah. So people can change. But that's also helpful to think about, the process of change, and this person may not always be the way they are now. And according to Buddhism, if you can accept the idea of Buddha nature, everybody is a potential Buddha. Everybody one day will be a Buddha, just like the Shakyamuni Buddha that we have so much respect for. And I think that's why a Buddha is able to feel so much love for everybody, because a Buddha can see the Buddha in everybody, the Buddha nature in everybody. And okay, it's just a matter of time. They're going to change, and eventually, wake up and stop being the way they are and become, really wonderful being. So for me, this kind of contemplation is really helpful. At least to soften the concrete view, and also see that the way I perceive that person is not the ultimate truth, the ultimate reality, all that there is. There's a lot more to the person than what I see. Just one other thing related to this. Just telling a personal story. Some years ago when I was living in Israel, and I had neighbors on either side of where I was living who were kind of noisy. And I'm very sensitive to noise. I notice it and I get irritated by it quite easily. So on one side there were some men, young men. They were sons of a family, and they would often be right outside their house, right next to my room where I was sleeping and working and so on, and talking really, really loud, and I found that quite irritating. And on the other side there was a guy who was a musician. He was actually a composer. And so he was composing music, and almost all day long, he'd be making music. It wasn't like super loud, but still it was there. And I like silence, so I found that kind of difficult. So it was quite difficult. And then I thought of this way of dealing with it that really helped, because I have one brother. One of my brothers likes to play music as well. And I stay in his house sometimes, with him and his family. And if he's playing music, I don't mind it so much, because he's my brother. I love him, and I'm also grateful that he lets me stay in his house. So when he's playing music, I don't mind it so much. So then I thought, okay, this guy next door he was playing music. If he was my brother, I wouldn't mind so much. So I just told myself, he's my brother. So when I would hear the music, I would think, oh, that's my brother playing music. And my mind had a completely different reaction to it. And I did the same with the guys on the other side. You know, I thought if these guys were my brothers, also I would feel differently, you know, about them talking in loud voices. So that was just something kind of similar to this, you know, just sort of questioning the way our mind perceives things. And just by changing your mind, changing your view, your perception of things, you can change your emotional reaction to things. Does that make sense? So I'm saying that also to encourage you to come up with your own methods. You know, I've been sharing some methods from the Buddhist tradition, and there's lots of other methods as well that you can hear about and read about. So there's lots of methods from the Buddhist tradition. But I think you can also, you know, be creative and come up with your own methods, things that might be helpful for you in facing the problems in life and learning ways to not be so overwhelmed by them. So I'll just say one more thing and then we'll stop and leave time for some questions. So in summary, as we go through life, as long as we're not yet enlightened, and even if we are following the path to enlightenment, like we really want to become enlightened, it is inevitable that we will encounter difficulties and problems in life. So we just can't expect that that won't happen. But the good thing is, when problems happen, we don't have to be overwhelmed by them and get all upset and, you know, have a lot of negative reactions to them. Although, you know, those reactions will come up, and we need to have compassion for ourselves and not judge ourselves if those things do come up in our mind. So we need to try to have a non-judgmental and friendly attitude towards ourselves and whatever comes up in our mind. But we also can understand that we can change our minds. We have choices to make. So we can do other things with our mind, change our thoughts and ways of reacting and so on, so that we have more positive states of mind rather than the negative, disturbing ones. And it takes some effort. It's not easy, you know, to put effort into it. But if we do try out these methods and we find that they help, they work, I think naturally we'll want to keep using them because they feel so much better. You know, it's so much nicer than being angry and upset and blaming and miserable and so on. So if you find some methods that work, then it will probably get easier to use them. And also what they say in the text is it might be best to start with smaller problems. Start working with little problems, and if you get used to doing these kind of methods with relatively small problems, and gradually you can work on bigger ones. Trying to tackle really huge problems right from the beginning might be too difficult, and you might not be able to do it, and then you might become discouraged. So, but if you start with little ones and get some success with little problems, then, you know, then the bigger ones will get easier. Does that make sense? So those are just some general ideas, and if you have any questions or comments or anything you'd like to share.
I just want to say thank you very much for the Nelson Mandela example. I don't know why I never thought about it, because growing up I was always very afraid of him, and yet I voted for him.
Oh, you're from South Africa, right?
Yes. So, I mean, I voted for him twice. I voted in the referendum for him to be freed, and I voted for him as president. But growing up, I was afraid of him. So this gives me a lot of hope, although I can't see myself ever voting for certain individuals now. But it gives me something to work with. So thank you. That's great.
I don't know all his life, but there was a film that came out not long ago. What was it called? A film about him and his life. Really wonderful film. A Long Road to Freedom, I think. Yeah, wonderful film.
So I came on retreat because I really wanted to look at the way that my mind gets stuck in sort of black and white thinking. and with compassion in particular, how to cultivate that softness and at the same time maintain boundaries, particularly with difficult people. So when I arrived here on Friday, this turkey feather was right in my path, and so I picked it up because I thought, okay, I need to meditate on this turkey feather. And so today, with the teaching of softness and sort of the gentleness that you were bringing, I was thinking about feathers and how soft they are and how humbling the Tonglen meditation is, and how often in my mind when I think about humility and vulnerability and compassion and softness, I interpret that as somehow weak. And I need to maintain firmness in my boundaries and even in my compassion. So as I think about feathers, they are soft, but they're strong enough to bring flight to a bird. They're strong enough to allow water to roll right off of their backs. And so that, just as an interpretation, just as a metaphor, was very, very helpful to me. So thank you.
Thank you for that. That was really beautiful. Yeah, this thing about, people sometimes have this idea that being compassionate and loving and patient and means you're weak and you're soft and people can walk all over you and do whatever they want to you like you're a doormat. And His Holiness, definitely says that is not the case. I mean, you can see it in him, he has this incredible compassion, but he's also really strong and tough and, determined. So we definitely need a balance there. Being strong, assertive on the one hand, and like you say, boundaries, keeping our boundaries, but at the same time have the soft, compassionate heart. Yeah, be able to say no when it's appropriate, be able to tell people they're doing something wrong when that is appropriate, but doing it with a softness in the heart.
Just brought to mind what Julia just said, reminded me that Roshi Joan Halifax, when she's training people, has them meditate with strong back, soft front. The strong back, holding it all together, and then staying open. So it's like, it's just a nice image for them.
Hi. Okay, I just wanted to say thank you. And after our talk today, I feel like you also showed me like how to be more compassionate towards myself over the weekend. So how to become like more understanding that other people are feeling the same way I am, and that there are answers out there. And
there are what?
Like there are ways to cope with our thoughts, and I think I took a lot of way this weekend regarding that there's like a lot of different practices I can implement in my life to solve some of the problems, or like feel some resolution with problems I face.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's so important to be compassionate to ourselves, and I know a lot of Westerners aren't very good at that, including myself. I still have a problem with that. And recently I listened to a talk on YouTube by Noah Levine. Have you heard of him? I met his father a long time ago, Stephen Levine. Wonderful, wonderful. One of the probably earliest teachers of Buddhist meditation in this country, and he did a lot of work with dying people and wrote some wonderful books about that, and he's passed away now. And I'd heard he had a son, but I didn't know much about him, so I listened to this talk, and it was really interesting because he kind of went a very different route. Got into drugs, became a drug addict, and ended up in jail before coming to meditation. So he said, he was sitting in jail at the age of 17 and desperate, and then remembered instructions on meditation he had heard from his father. So that's when he started meditating. And some of the things he said I found very inspiring. He had a lot of problems with self-hatred and low negative image of himself and so on. And he would try to do meditation on loving kindness from like Sharon Salzberg and so on. And he said for the first 5 years, he was just saying the words, but not really meaning it. Yeah, like, may I be happy, may others be happy, and so on. So he was just saying those words, but he didn't really mean the But after 5 years, that's a long time, right, to keep practicing and not giving up. After 5 years, he started to mean it. But he still didn't feel it. Didn't have the actual feeling. But he kept going, and then after 10 years, then he started to really feel it. So I think that's really helpful, because sometimes I think people, they hear about these practices, loving kindness, compassion, they try to do them, but then they feel, I don't feel anything. I don't really feel it. And then they may give up. They may feel, I can't do this, it's not working, or whatever. But the point is, we have to, and that's just my experience as well, it was a long time before I could actually feel those feelings, But that's the point. We have to keep doing it. We have to keep trying. And it's enough just to say the words. So we need to feel good about the fact that we're at least trying to generate those thoughts. Just to say those words to ourselves. It's a way of leaving imprints in our mind. And slowly, slowly, the more you do it, the mind will start to change. And you will start little bit in the beginning. You'll start to have the feelings. Does that make sense? So it's so important to understand that, not give up, not get discouraged and give up and think, I'm a failure, I can't do it, it's not working. But just keep trying, and slowly, 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 like in his case, 10 years, finally he was able to start really feeling the love and the compassion. And I had the impression that he is a really loving and caring person, and he's doing a lot of work to help, especially addicts, I think. He's got these programs to help people addicted to drugs and alcohol and so on. And because he's been through that himself, I think he's in a good position to be able to do that. So I was really inspired by that.
One thing that you've offered that I think is a profoundly important thing, but it was a really subtle offering, and that is that you've given permission, and I want to thank you, and I really appreciate it. So the Buddha is always suggesting to try these things out for ourselves and to see if they work. But there's an element of needing permission to do that, because when we have something so established, who am I to challenge that in any way? So one of the things you did even when you were mentioning meditation by Thich Nhat Hanh, and you said something like, just change up the words and however it works for you. And that is so profound, and it worked definitely for me years and years ago when I was doing a breathing meditation. And it goes breathing in, I calm my body, breathing out, I smile, dwelling in the present moment, for I know this is a wonderful moment. And it was during a horrible time in my life and tremendous suffering. And so when I came across that breathing meditation, I thought, this is not a wonderful moment. This is a terrible moment. I'm not in a good place. And so I changed it to breathing in, I calm my body, breathing out, I smile. In this moment, I'm not okay. And I'm okay.
Yeah, there's a wonderful book. I don't know if you've heard of Kristen Neff. She's a psychologist and also a meditator. And she spent about 10 years doing research on self-compassion. And she wrote a book called Self-Compassion, in which she presents her findings from this research. But she also tells her own story. And I really like that when people bring their own stories in, and the difficulties, the struggles, and so on. So it's a really, really helpful book for anyone who's struggling with that, self-compassion or whatever. And she also has a website where you can find more things, download meditations from her. She has a lovely voice and so on. And she makes a suggestion of a kind of like a mantra, words that you can say to yourself to have more compassion. But she says, you can. These are the words I use, but you can use any words you want. So I think that is nice, to feel that we don't have to stick to the words that somebody else has made. I mean, they might be helpful and inspiring, but I think we can also be free to change it to what works best for us. I mean, I do that myself. So I think it's okay, because the point is we're trying to bring about a change in our mind and our heart. And if somebody else's words don't quite do that, but we can find some other words that do that, I don't see anything wrong with that. I think that's fine.